So we've got all these studies done in the last 25 years or 15 years. And then we have a letter that was written within about a generation of Jesus' death. That's what Jane read to us. A letter that was written within a generation of the cross. And part of that letter says, and it will say it in different ways, but it says, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. And let us not give up meeting together, or as Jane read, worshipping together, as some are in the habit of doing. Do you know, this suggests to me that even in the very early days of the church, people began to think, it doesn't really matter if we don't meet together. It's not really that important if we don't belong. But it does. And it's obvious that somebody had to write a letter to tell them, don't give up meeting together as others have begun to do. But what makes the difference between belonging and not belonging? And why should we belong? Let's just remind ourselves of those statistics if we look at the slide. Those who attend a religious service, and it doesn't have to be in a building that looks like that, at least once a month, reduce their risk of death by about a third. This is statistics, by the way. Can't guarantee it, but it's statistics. And they have a longer life expectancy than those who don't. I mean, that's quite incredible that the research comes out and seems to identify people who not only have a faith, but who belong somewhere, that actually makes you generally healthier and generally happier. And I want to give you 3 reasons why I think this is. And these aren't reasons I've just come up with. These are actually reasons that I've pulled out of this book, which I mentioned last week, called The Blue Zones. And it's not written by Bill Hybels, a Christian writer. It's not written by, as far as I can tell, a pastor or a minister. It's written by a journalist and a researcher who worked for National Geographic. And the interesting thing is that the things he came up with are pretty solid when it comes to what the Bible tells us about meeting together. So that's what we're going to look at this morning. So if we pull up the next slide, the first reason that we should belong, and the first reason I think that belonging actually makes a difference to our lives, is connecting or connections. This is a painting by a Japanese painter of, have a guess, anyone can guess? The Last Supper, the time when Jesus met with his disciples for the final time before he was betrayed and before he died on a cross, and he shared bread and he shared wine. And this Japanese painter has interpreted it like that, and it's this kind of togetherness that you see, this connectedness that you see Jesus with his disciples. And I can't underestimate to you how important it is for us to be socially connected with other people. That's a very elaborate way of saying we've got to have people we depend on, that we meet with regularly in various forms. So for instance, when I used to work in an office, I had colleagues. And that can be difficult, but it can also be an incredibly important part of your life when you begin to grow closer to these people and you depend on them, not just in the workplace, but when life is taking a turn for the worst. They're there for you. If you're not there one day or you're slightly off colour, the right sort of colleagues will check up on you and make sure you're all right. And that's incredibly helpful to people. What about club mates, people who are part of clubs? I've got various experiences of clubs I've been part of. University football clubs, that's slightly different in terms of social connectedness. But bowling, chess. There's a chess club that meets now on a Tuesday in the library between 5 and 7 o'clock, and I'm finding I can actually pop along there, and people are saying, oh, such and such, oh, he's not here, do you think he's all right? You know, little things like that bring out the benefits of what it means to be part of a club. That's why social clubs formed. There's a Welsh social club in Hereford. I always find it really interesting when you go to towns and there's these clubs that seem to have no connection whatsoever with the fact that it's Hereford. So there's obviously a strong Welsh population in Hereford. You'll find Polish social clubs as well. And it's because people can group together and they can get mutual benefit. They're not only lifted in their spirits, but there is a practical reason of being part of that club. And these are some of the reasons I think that being socially connected makes you healthier. The first is there is actual practical support. If you're on your own, if you don't connect with other people, if other people don't really know you, they don't know when you're not there. And that's quite a powerful thing of recognizing when someone's not there, because it means that they might not be well. And people will be checking up on them. But if you have no connectedness, no friendships, no places that you go to regularly, it's frightening how in a modern society people can just fall between the gaps. They can be missed out. Something could happen to them. And people may not discover that for days, weeks, and sadly sometimes months or years that something has happened to somebody. That practical support of just being there and knowing that people are regularly there, that actually means that you're likely to live longer. Whether it's in a social club, whether it's in a church like this on a Sunday, or whether you're meeting regularly during the week, having a regular group of people who notice when you're not there and who pay attention to how you are will enrich your life. It also sometimes makes it difficult when we fall out or when we don't agree with what's happening with that particular club. And it happens in chess clubs and bowling clubs all across the world, just as it does in churches. But the support can never be underestimated, even just the practical support. And the second thing, and this is more specific to what we do here, is prayer. Prayer. We can pray on our own. Great. And I encourage you to do that. But when we meet together to pray, something different happens. We learn from each other, whether it's in a group of 2 or 3 people or in a church setting. Last Sunday evening, we had a time of prayer. David led us in a time of prayer, and we could say amen to what he was praying. And we could feel that we are part of it. But more than that, prayer actually works. It works not just because we think it works because there's a God listening, but I heard a really interesting statistic from somebody who's not a Christian, and he was encouraging people of the power of prayer. He was doing a talk about spirituality, and he said, prayer statistically, if you pray for people who are ill, the chances are they will recover better and quicker. And it doesn't matter why you think that is, it's a fact. This is a guy who is not a Christian telling you that prayer works. That's incredible. I love hearing people say that because you can then direct them towards the source of all that power. Another important thing about social connectedness that cannot be underestimated is laughter. Laughter is very, very good for you. You may have heard statistics about this, or you may have just heard some news articles. But people who laugh together are healthier than people who don't laugh. There's something about laughing which releases stress, which actually is physically good for you because it releases certain types of hormones and chemicals. Laughter is important. And yeah, you could watch a funny film and laugh on your own, but there's something about a group of people sharing together and laughing together. So I want to ask a question, and I'm going to ask a question for each of these next 3. Well, this is the first. Each of the 3 reasons I think belonging is important. So the first question to do with connectedness that you can perhaps ask yourself and think carefully about it is, what support group do I belong to? Outside of my family, what support group do I belong to? And that's a really important question, because if you don't, if there's not something that you belong to regularly, then you're missing out, in all honesty. You're missing out on something that's really, really important. In one of the blue zones that this writer writes about, in Japan, in Okinawa, a lady of over 100 meets regularly at 3:30 with her group of friends. Now, it's got a Japanese word. There is a particular Japanese word for a group of friends that meets regularly, and I can't pronounce it. I can't even remember how it's spelt. But they have a particular word. Every day, 3:30, she meets with all these younger ladies. They're in the 90s. She's 100 or so. So they look out for her. They make sure she's okay. And this regular meeting gives her a sense of purpose. And again, they notice when she's not there. And another thing they do is if somebody's struggling financially, they might have a good chat about people's circumstances, but if somebody's struggling, they pool their resources together. And they think, well, we could help them out in this way or in that way. That kind of support is incredible. I was part of a growing church at St. Peter's in Worcester, and it was a huge church of, well, it wasn't thousands, but it was big. 250, 300 people in the morning service, in the second service, and the first one was about 100. And it's one of these churches where if you sit in a particular spot, you will get to know the people who sit around you. Then you move to another spot, and you will know nobody. And it's very easy to get lost in a big church like that. And everybody thinks that somebody else is looking out for you. And their way of dealing with that was having house groups, or what we call here small groups. Because if you move around the church from Sunday to Sunday, nobody's going to know, really, if you're not there. Some weeks, I didn't know if some of my best friends were there because it was such a big church. But if I met regularly during the week with a small group of, say, 9 or 10 people, and somebody wasn't there or somebody was having a hard time, I would know about it. And that was how I got to know people, and that was how we got supported in a place like St. Peter's. And that's something that's really important to us here in this church, is small groups. Many of you are part of small groups that meet during the week. Some of you are not, or some of you meet irregularly. It's not a challenge, it's just if you're not part of a regular small group, come and have a chat with me afterwards. There are some fantastic small group leaders. There's lots of different types. They meet at different intervals during the week and sometimes not weekly. There will be something that will enable you to get connected. And if there isn't, then it's likely that something will be started up that gets you connected. We feel so passionately that that is important in our church. And there's always the argument that small groups become cliquey, become kind of insular, and people find it difficult to break into small groups. I think it's worth the risk, personally. I think it's worth the risk that we build small networks of people who care for one another in a way that we cannot do on a Sunday morning because we see each other so briefly. So I think it's worth the risk. What's the perfect example of well, it's not a perfect example. It's actually a very good example, but it's not perfect. Jesus and his disciples, the people on there surrounding him, they were a mixed bunch of people. They fell out. But Jesus stuck by them, and regularly they learned from each other. And they transformed the world. And they started off as a small group. And then they spread. He didn't have, do you know what, I'm going to start a mega church, says Jesus. So he starts a mega church of thousands of people, and that was how his message spread. No, he brings a small group of people together. They support each other through thick and thin. They have some hard times. Someone leaves the small group. But in the end, that small group of disciples transforms the world through the power of Jesus. So get connected if you're not already connected. It will make a difference. Okay, the second reason, behavior. There we go. That's what the repeatable bumper sticker. I did find some that I couldn't repeat in a church setting. I bet Jesus would have used his turn signals. I think that's telling the driver behind them that they should indicate. Do you know, it's funny. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I had a real thing about fishes on the back of people's cars. If I was following a car with a fish on the back of their car, I would watch for their driving. And in fact, I would actually keep my distance. And worse than that, car parking, right? If I was in a car park, I wouldn't park next to somebody with a fish sticker. Because my experience of it, and it was limited and prejudice, I know, was that people with little fish stickers on the back of their car were more likely to scrape your car in a car park than anybody else, right? Now, that was misguided, but that was my experience. The fish stickers, if you're not aware, the fish stickers are a sign that you're a Christian, usually, and they will have some Greek letters in the back. But I wouldn't do anything like that. In fact, I did have an Alpha sticker on the back of my car, and I remember overtaking someone in a rather dangerous place, and then tucking in ahead of them and thinking they're going to read my Alpha sticker. They're going to know I'm a Christian. So I've taken all Christian memorabilia off the car now, so I can drive as I wish. Oh no, that is not the point. That isn't the point. The second possible reason why churchgoers tend to live longer, I'm making you laugh, that's a good thing. It's not a good thing why you're laughing, but may be down, that the second reason why churchgoers may live longer may be down to behavior. Simply put, behavior. In the olden days, we used to call it clean living, didn't we? Clean living. We're staying pure. We're living in a clean way. And it's a very kind of stereotypical image of a Christian. But it's a fact. People who have a faith and who follow that faith through behave differently, or they should. And we tend to, although you have probably lots of stories of Christians who don't, but we tend to live in less destructive ways to ourselves and to others. And that might be a reason why we have a longer life expectancy. We don't necessarily do all the destructive things. So, for instance, we may be really bad at parking our cars, but we don't drive ridiculously at high speeds. Or we try and honor the speed limit. Again, it's tongue-in-cheek a bit, but there is reality to it. And the researchers suggested this. They were saying, well, perhaps Christians, because this survey particularly picked on Christians, perhaps they do actually follow what they believe, and this helps them to live longer because they're less likely to suffer from the problems that other people might suffer from if they don't follow through in their beliefs. But what that means for people like you and I who regularly come to church is, therefore, we can't just believe, we've got to also behave. Otherwise, there will be no benefit to being a Christian in terms of health or in terms of happiness. If we don't act out what we believe, we're just like everybody else. We don't get the benefits. And in fact, we get worse than that because we're kind of living a lie. We're believing something and acting in a completely different way. And that's part of the story from the research. To actually benefit from belonging to a church community, you have to do more than just show up once a month on a Sunday. You have to change your behavior. You have to change your life. And that's something, again, that we believe in strongly here, that if the more that you come to know and to hear about and to experience Jesus, the more you will experience life change, positive life change. And it will look different depending on who you are. There are different things that we will need to change and that God will change in us. But it will happen if we align what we believe with how we act out. So here's the second question. The first was, which support group am I part of other than my family? The second one here is, does what I believe affect how I behave? Does the fact that Rob is a minister affect the way he drives down to Cardiff Baptist College when he used to drive 2.5 hours? Or does he just wait until he gets to the Baptist College to behave? I do remember, no, I won't tell you another story. It's gonna get worse. But it's a reality, isn't it? Unless we act it out, our belief is almost useless because we're not following through. We're not living it out. We're not setting an example. And I just wonder how important it really is to us if we don't actually behave the way we should when we believe. Finally, trust. This lady is a lady called Panchita from Costa Rica. And the last I heard, I think she was 106 when this was taken. This is the lady who goes out and clears a garden with a machete. I think she's probably no longer with us, but when this was taken, when the research was done, she was still a fairly active 106-year-old. And we're going to look at her a bit later on. But I just want to go back to a talk that I was hearing. Somebody was giving a talk on spirituality. And actually, spirituality is really difficult to define. I found it really hard to define what it means, and I've come up with something. I think that spirituality means that we believe in something or someone greater than ourselves, and that affects how we act. It doesn't mean that you have a faith. It doesn't mean you're a Christian. It just means you recognize there is more to this life than just what we see around us. And more importantly, there's more to us than just the sum of our parts. We're not just flesh and bones. There is more. There is something greater. And some of us believe there is someone greater. That's what I think spirituality is. And I think that most people in this world are spiritual people. In fact, my personal belief is everyone is. And they express it in a different way. They recognize there is more to this life than just flesh, bones, and what we see around us. But that's not the same as faith. If spirituality is believing in something or someone greater than us, faith is trusting in that someone or something. Faith is taking that step and saying, I don't just believe that this is what's happening. I'm going to do something about it. I am going to trust in that someone or something. And I want to read to you what the researchers said about this lady Panchita. And remember, as far as I can tell, the researchers aren't Christians. They're scientists, first and foremost. This is what they said about her. Panchita's faith was amazing. Her unwavering belief that no matter how bad things got, God would take care of everything. Indeed, looking back, and this is the researcher writing this, I realized that most of the 200 centenarians, and I think that means people who live over 100, I had met, believed in a similar guiding power. That's incredible, isn't it? Most of the 100-year-old people believed in a guiding power of some sort. Panchita was yet another example of the power of faith. So when you ask the most highly functioning seniors, again, this is the researcher writing this, how they are, they always say, I feel good, thanks to God. Yet they may be blind or deaf, their bones may hurt, and psychologists call this, I love the way psychologists just turn something which is a beautiful idea into a very kind of mechanical phrase. Psychologists call this an external locus of control. Okay? So when somebody says, you believe in God, you say, yeah. You might think of it as an external locus of control. No, don't say that. And it's probably not a good idea. They relinquish control of their lives to God. And again, this is what the researcher's writing, not me. They go through life with a peaceful certitude that someone is looking out for them. And the most amazing thing is, in church, when something good happens to us from God, sometimes we'll tell people about it. And we call that testimony, right? We call it testimony when something great happens to us because of what we believe in God and how God is treating us. And when we share that, that's called a testimony. I'm going to give you my testimony. Sometimes it's about our whole lives, and sometimes it's just, I just want to tell you about what happened yesterday. There's a testimony in this book. It's incredible. A book by a non-Christian. It's a testimony. One of the researchers was speaking to another one, and she says this. I wasn't going to share this with you, she told me that night at dinner. But I was alone with this lovely, magical person, Panchita. She doesn't live in a nice home. She's so poor, yet she's so satisfied with what she has. There was total acceptance, but I wanted to help her anyway, so I handed her $20. And the other researcher said, okay, so what happened? And the lady said, well, Panchita told me I had no money to buy food today, but I knew God would provide, and now he has. The incredible thing about trust is that it enables you to live your life knowing that whatever happens, there is someone greater than you who is looking out for you. And that makes us healthier. That gives us a greater chance to live a long and a healthy life. And so the third question to do with trust is, where do I put my trust? Where do I put my trust? And as Christians, we can come up with the simple, oh God, or Jesus, the simple answer. But when it boils down to it, when you're in a situation where, just as Panchita was, she needed money, where could she put her trust? Well, maybe she would try and get it from somewhere, or she would work really hard for it, and then she would get all stressed about the fact that she didn't have the money. No, she put her trust in God, and that's what true trust is. When things aren't going well, and we decide to rely upon the guiding power of God. You know, if you were to stand outside this church or similar churches like this as an outsider and you looked in and you saw the kind of things that people like us would do and people like us believe and how we would behave and how we would trust, you could look in and say, man, what they do is good for them. That's really good that this little community of people are living healthier and longer lives because they're socially connected with those around them and with the people in the church, that they actually follow through in what they believe and therefore they behave in such a way that makes their life fuller and healthier, and that they have this external locus of control. They trust in God. They realize it's not all down to them, but that there is a higher power in charge. Isn't that fantastic? And you're standing outside looking in saying, that is amazing. The problem is that's just the first step. Figuring out those things is the first step. The real question is, why? Why does being socially connected, why does behaving in a way that honors what we believe about God, why does trusting in God allow us to live healthier, longer lives in general? Did the church just stumble across it? Did we just stumble across this magic formula and say, there we go, isn't this amazing, let's build religious services around it? Or did it evolve? Did it evolve over time so that all the churches that weren't doing this died out and only the ones that are continuing to honor connectedness, to behave and to trust, only they're the ones that are surviving? Well, I want to suggest another reason. And this is what it really all boils down to. I would love all of us to live healthier, longer lives. But this is the key. This is crucial to me. I believe we were designed in such a way that we flourish when we are in a relationship with our Creator. That's what I believe all this is about. That we flourish, that we do well. In fact, that we do better than we could do if we were not in a relationship with our Creator God. And when we're supported by others who are in a relationship with God, that's the belonging side of all of this. So that leaves really two groups of people who could respond to what we've been hearing this morning. The first is those of us who've been coming to church and are part of a church. Is there a way we could get more deeply connected with those around us? Is there a way that we could behave that honors our belief more fully? And are there questions of trust there that we need to address? That's for the group of people who are already connected and already involved. And then there's the second group of people, perhaps you're not as connected. You come here and it's an incredible group of people, but there's something more. In order to flourish, we need to have a relationship with our Creator, and we need to be close to the people who feel and act the same way. That's what belonging to a church is all about. So my prayer for all of us this morning is that we will know more fully what it means for us as individuals to belong to a church and to know our Creator. Let's pray.